Imagine waking up every single morning, reaching for your phone before you even brush your teeth. Not to check messages, not to scroll through news, but because your brain is already demanding something. A fix, a hit, something most people would never admit to out loud. And the terrifying part? Millions of people are living this exact reality right now, and the majority of them have absolutely no idea that what they're experiencing isn't a moral failure, it's neuroscience. Today we're going to go somewhere most creators are too afraid to go. We're going to pull back the curtain on the psychology of pornography addiction, not to shame anyone, not to push an agenda, but because understanding what's actually happening inside the minds of people caught in this cycle might be the most important conversation nobody is having, honestly. But before we go any deeper, and I genuinely want to hear from you in the comments, here's a question that I think a lot of people are silently wrestling with. Do you think pornography addiction is a real addiction that deserves medical treatment? Or do you think it's just weak willpower dressed up in scientific language to avoid personal responsibility? Drop your answer below. There is no wrong answer here, and I promise you, this comment section is going to get interesting. Now let's talk about the brain, because everything starts there. When someone watches pornography, the brain releases a powerful cocktail of neurochemicals, primarily dopamine. And dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical people think it is. Dopamine is actually the anticipation chemical. It's the chemical of wanting, of craving, of seeking. Every time someone clicks on a new video, every time they scroll searching for something more intense, more novel, more stimulating, that's dopamine doing exactly what it was designed to do in a very different evolutionary context. It was supposed to drive you to hunt for food, to seek a mate, to survive. But pornography, and specifically the endless scroll of modern internet pornography, has essentially hijacked that ancient wiring and turned it into a slot machine inside your skull. What makes modern pornography so neurologically potent compared to almost anything else is something researchers call the Coolidge effect. This is a real, documented psychological phenomenon observed across nearly all mammalian species. The basic principle is this: sexual arousal dramatically increases when a new partner is introduced. In nature, this made sense. Variety meant more offspring, more survival. But with internet pornography, the brain is tricked into believing it's experiencing unlimited novelty, unlimited new partners, unlimited stimulation, without any of the real-world social, emotional, or physical effort that would normally accompany those experiences. The brain can't tell the difference between what's real and what's on a screen. It just floods the system with dopamine and says, more. Here's where it starts to get psychologically complex. After repeated exposure, after months and sometimes years of heavy pornography use, something called desensitization begins to happen. The same content that used to produce a powerful neurological response gradually starts producing a weaker one. The dopamine receptors in the brain actually begin to downregulate. They reduce in number and sensitivity because the brain is trying to restore balance. It's trying to protect itself from being overwhelmed. But what this means for the person living through it is that they now need more stimulation to feel the same level of arousal they used to feel. They find themselves searching for more extreme content, more taboo material, content they never would have imagined watching when they first started. And this isn't a character flaw. This is what addiction does to a brain. This is the exact same mechanism at work in heroin addiction, in gambling addiction, in alcoholism. The drug changes the brain, and then the brain demands more of the drug. But pornography addiction is also psychologically unique in ways that other addictions are not, and this is something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Unlike alcohol or drugs, pornography leaves no physical trace. There's no smell, no stumbling, no visible impairment. You can be sitting in a meeting, at a family dinner, next to your partner on the couch, and nobody knows. This invisibility creates a particular kind of psychological prison, because the shame and the secrecy become just as powerful as the addiction itself. Psychologists have found that shame is one of the strongest predictors of continued addictive behavior, not one of the cures, one of the causes. The more ashamed someone feels, the more likely they are to seek escape from that shame. And what do they use to escape? The very thing causing the shame in the first place. It becomes a self-feeding loop that can last for years, sometimes decades. Now let's talk about attachment theory, because here's where things get really fascinating, and honestly, a little heartbreaking. Research in psychology has found that many people who develop compulsive pornography habits have specific attachment styles, particularly what's known as an avoidant or anxious avoidant attachment style. These are people who, often due to early childhood experiences, learned that emotional intimacy was either unavailable, painful, or unpredictable. They learned to regulate their emotions alone rather than in connection with others. And pornography is, among many things, a form of intimacy that requires absolutely nothing from you emotionally. There is no rejection, there is no vulnerability, there is no risk of being abandoned or hurt. For someone whose nervous system was wired early in life to see intimacy as dangerous, pornography can feel like the safest relationship they've ever had. And that is not a joke. That is a clinical reality that therapists working with pornography addicts describe again and again. This connects directly to what many researchers now believe is one of the most underreported consequences of long-term pornography addiction, which is a measurable reduction in real-world intimacy satisfaction. Studies have found that heavy pornography users often report lower sexual satisfaction with real partners, reduced emotional connection during physical intimacy, and in many cases, a clinical condition called pornography-induced erectile dysfunction, which is exactly what it sounds like. Young, otherwise healthy men in their 20s and 30s who are physically incapable of maintaining arousal with a real human partner, but have no issue with pornography. This is one of the most striking pieces of clinical evidence that what we're talking about is not simply a behavioral preference or a moral issue. Something is happening in the brain that is measurably altering how these individuals experience reality and human connection. The psychological profile of someone deep in pornography addiction is also frequently misunderstood by people on the outside. The common assumption is that these are socially deviant individuals, people who are somehow different from the general population. But the clinical picture tells a very different story. Many compulsive pornography users are high-functioning, intelligent, deeply empathetic people who are simultaneously managing significant internal pain, anxiety, depression, loneliness, chronic stress, trauma. Pornography often begins not as a sexual pursuit, but as a coping mechanism. It begins in adolescence for a huge number of people, at a time when the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and long-term decision-making, is still over a decade away from full development. Teenagers discover pornography, use it to manage stress or loneliness or social anxiety, and before the brain is even fully formed, a deeply ingrained neural pathway has been established. By the time they're adults, the habit is not just a habit, it's wired in. And let's talk about what recovery actually looks like, because most conversations about this topic either ignore it completely or reduce it to just stop watching. That advice is about as useful as telling a person with clinical depression to just cheer up. Real recovery from compulsive pornography use involves a process of neurological rewiring that takes time, often significant time. There is a well-documented period that people in recovery communities sometimes call the flat line, during which the brain, newly deprived of its artificial dopamine stimulation, essentially goes quiet. People describe feeling emotionally numb, experiencing low motivation, low libido, reduced ability to feel pleasure from anything at all. This can last weeks or even months. And this is the stage where most people relapse, not because they're weak, but because they don't understand what's happening neurologically, and they interpret the flatline as evidence that they'll never feel normal again. But here's what the neuroscience also tells us, and this is important. The brain is neuroplastic. It changes. The same mechanism that allowed pornography to rewire the brain's reward circuitry can, with time and the right conditions, rewire it back. Studies on individuals who have successfully reduced or eliminated compulsive pornography use show measurable improvements in dopamine receptor sensitivity, improvements in mood and motivation, improvements in real-world relationship satisfaction, and significant reductions in anxiety and depression. The brain heals. It takes time, and it takes support, and it takes understanding what you're actually dealing with, but it heals. The most important thing that psychology wants us to understand about pornography addiction is that judgment is not a treatment plan. Telling someone they're disgusting, that they're broken, that they need to simply try harder does not help. It deepens the shame. And as we already discussed, deeper shame means a stronger addiction loop. What actually helps is what helps with every other form of addiction: compassion, clinical support, community, and the replacement of maladaptive coping mechanisms with adaptive ones. It's therapy that addresses the underlying emotional wounds. It's rebuilding real human connection, even when that feels terrifying. It's understanding that the part of you craving stimulation is not evil. It's a part of you that learned a very broken strategy for managing very real pain. We live in a world that created the conditions for this addiction to flourish: unlimited access, complete privacy, zero social accountability, and an algorithmic design optimized to keep you watching as long as possible. Platforms profit from compulsive behavior, and yet the conversation we have as a society almost always places the entire burden of responsibility on the individual, without ever asking the bigger question of what we owe each other in terms of honesty, education, and support. If something in this video resonated with you, whether you're someone personally navigating this, or someone trying to understand a partner, a friend, a family member, I want you to know that you're not alone in it, not even close. And the fact that you're here, trying to understand the psychology behind it rather than just passing judgment, says something important about who you are. Now go drop your thoughts in the comments. Is this a real addiction or an excuse? Do you think society is doing enough to address it? Have you or someone you know experienced this? And what did it actually take to work through it? This conversation matters, and it starts right here.